So there's been a lot of Mavuika gameplay and they finally announced Mavuika's banner details. So it's time to talk about her. So I do want to say right off the bat, Mavuika does seem very strong, absolutely. And it's cool that I already have a lot of different team ideas for both off-field and on-field roles. But I do want to focus this video on the positives and negatives with her release that I think can be very important. And I think it's a mistake to focus too much on whether she has bigger numbers than other characters. The first thing I noticed is, wow, buying into this new Mavuika system can be very expensive. Check this out. So I'm sure you guys have seen other people's videos already. You know roughly what she does. And basically she's kind of relying on a lot of the newer Natlan supports. And the way it looks is that they have either wanted you to be pulling leading up to and around Mavuika's release and then her as well, or if you've missed the supports, they want you to be going very hard into Mavuika.
What do you mean by that?
So if I look at 5.0, this banner here has Chevrolet, very nice teammate for Mavuika. Next banner 5.1, Xilonen. Obviously, I'm sure you guys have heard, very important teammate for Mavuika. And then this second banner 5.1, this is a skip, that's fine. But 5.2, Chaska Lini banner, here is Ororon. This is a 4-star Natlan support. And then there's Mavuika's banner herself, has Mavuika and Bennett. But then alongside Mavuika, there is also Xilonen, who is also a very important Natlan support. And then after them, there is the Arlecchino clorinde banner, and this again has Chevrolet. So if you want to play Mavuika's overload teams, Chevrolet, Ororon, Chevrolet again, that is one of the alternatives to the 5-star team, which will have Xilonen and Xilonen. But all those characters are carefully put on other banners. Now, I don't want to say this is a conspiracy, but this is like the first time that they are ever releasing 2 of the new characters at the start of a patch in the first half, and then the reruns in the second half. And from what I know, I could be wrong, but I believe the free 20 pulls we get from Chinese New Year, I believe you can't actually get that in this banner. You can only get that during the reruns with the Chronicles and the Arlecchino and clorinde banner. So those extra pulls that you can get this patch won't actually be able to help you directly on this banner. Now, of course, there is a small drama at the moment because, like I said, you don't have to get all these supports. You definitely don't have to. But what they have decided to do is, if you didn't manage to get those supports, they actually have given her very powerful vertical investment. And there's this C1 which seems to do basically everything. This first spot here, increasing her fighting spirit, makes her more self-sufficient, so she's less reliant on Natlan supports to battery her for her burst. Plus, you're increasing her skill duration from 12 to 18 seconds. And on top of that, she gets a very nice attack boost and very nice exploration boost. This C1 here seems to be some very nice bait, because as we all know, getting the supports is easier said than done. I'm sure there are a lot of people who didn't know exactly what she was going to do, so you would have been saving up for Mavuika, but then only before she came out you learned that she's very reliant on Natlan supports and you're kind of screwed. But this is a solution they're giving, but it is a very expensive solution. So yeah, let's be honest, it is clear they are wanting you to invest a lot of pulls or money into her teams, whether it's for her supports or whether it's for her directly. Plus, for example, I mean, although this gameplay does look pretty solid, it is still pretty good. The general conclusion right now is, at least for her most popular teams, she kind of does need both Xilonen and Bennett. But the truth is, Xilonen and Bennett don't need Mavuika. I mean, they're working very well in a bunch of different current teams. They work well outside of this system already. Not to mention, you could make this argument that Mavuika's system could have a shorter lifespan than most. We are in Natlan at the moment, but when Snezhnaya and 6.0 hits, let's be honest, you're maybe looking at 1 Natlan character per year at best. And then when we get to that point, there'll be the new region with the new region's characters, and everyone will be hyped up with that stuff anyway. I also do want to bring up star rail trends. From what I've noticed, people who struggle the most, you can say, or who feel the most power creep, are the people who are constantly chasing the new trends. Like, say for example, you might have been hyped with Acheron, and then you get Acheron's team, but then Fei Xiao comes out, and then you want to invest in Fei Xiao's follow-up team, but then there's a whole new team archetype. and then maybe you get into the break teams with Rapper. Whereas in comparison, I've always found that I don't struggle that much with the Star Rail content because I invested well into whichever team I invest in, and same thing with a lot of other people. I think if you're going to be investing in a Mavuika system or different particular systems, you don't want to do it half-hearted and end up not really building these characters properly. And stuff like getting a signature weapon on Mavuika, getting her teammates properly, that can give you a longer lifespan. So I don't want to say you need to vertically invest in Mavuika if that's what you're going for, but I'm saying commit to it. If you do want to commit to Mavuika, then don't be pulling a bunch of different DPSs around her, and then she won't feel inadequate 6 months, a year from now, compared to if you're still using her on a cheap 4-star weapon and if you're missing a bunch of her teammates. So I do want to say, to be completely honest, we might see massive differences between players using budget Mavuikas versus players who could afford to get a bunch of 5-star investment. I think not everyone is a content creator or a high spender who can pull on every single banner. So I just want to make sure you manage your expectations with whatever investment Mavuika you manage to get. Anyway, regardless of her potentially being very expensive, like I said, I do think she'll be very strong. So one of the most common questions right now is, how does she compare with Xiangling? And I can give you my thoughts. I think in a lot of teams, she will be stronger than Xiangling for sure. A team like this with clorinde is a team I'm most excited to try with Mavuika. I always thought that these clorinde teams were pretty strong, these overload teams, but they were missing the final ingredient. And although I do like Xiangling in this team, she doesn't really bring any buffs to this team unless you use her on noblesse, which, let's be honest, most people don't. So she's mostly just contributing damage and sustaining the overload buffs from Chevreuse. So even if Mavuika does slightly less damage than Xiangling in this team, which might not even be the case, but just being able to use the Scrolls artifact set, which will buff the whole team, it'll give you 40% pyro, 40% electro damage. This should be a very nice buff. Plus, it might also be the case where, because clorinde has some downtime, you should have time to use Mavuika's burst and it should be very nice damage. But I'll also be happy, like I said, to just use Mavuika as a skill bot just to proc scrolls and do good sub DPS damage, because even that by itself should be an upgrade over Xiangling. 40% buff to this team is no joke. But as for relying on Mavuika's burst, you guys might have seen, but you probably do need Ororon, because he's an Atlan support, which will help battery Mavuika. But as I showed, let's be honest, most people probably won't even have Ororon, let alone Ororon with high constellations, because his banner is just before Mavuika's banner. But even then, Kujo Sara should still be amazing, potentially even better than Ororon, just because of how Kujo Sara is just so good at buffing in teams like this. Even if you have to use Mavuika's burst every once in a while rather than constantly, Sara in this team should be amazing. Plus there's Navia teams where I also think she'll be a very popular replacement over Xiangling. But I do want to say a lot of people are talking about dual DPS teams with Navia, where you play Mavuika a lot on field, and I have to say I don't really know how well those teams will work. This is because, as you guys know, Xilonen and Navia teams at the moment do not have the best crystallized application for Navia's skill. This is because Xilonen doesn't have off-field geo application. So what you're doing is you're quite reliant on Navia's burst and normal attacking with Navia in order to generate enough crystallized shards to increase her skill damage. And even then, being so reliant on Navia's burst and her normal attack, you still quite often don't get max stacks and it can be kind of scuffed, even though Xilonen's buffs and what she brings to the team is still a very nice benefit. So I can only see that getting worse if you don't really get to do much normal attacks on Navia, and if you're spending time on Mavuika. Just relying on Navia's burst, this doesn't even have the best uptime anyway. It does not have a lot of geo application. I can see you struggling to even reach 3 stacks on this team, let alone even be able to cast 3 skills. If you want to play Navia in more of a quick swap role, I'll be surprised if you can ever do more than 2. Whereas what I do think will be a more effective playstyle is using Mavuika more of a burst skill bot, but still spending most of your field time on Navia. I think Mavuika's burst damage will be very nice in this team, and her buffs will be very nice for Navia. Let's not forget that. I just don't think I'm a believer in the dual DPS playstyle and spending a lot of time on Mavuika in this team. There is also a big discussion right now on Mavuika versus Arlecchino versus neuvillette. And the thing I noticed is, because Mavuika does seem like a character that relies on her elemental skill, and then once she is batteried by Natlan supports or by her C1, then she transforms into the burst damage dealing role. Does that remind you of anyone? Because honestly, for me, that reminds me of Raiden Shogun. I think both characters have their pros and cons, and I don't like focusing too much on whether one character does 500 more DPS or 1000 more DPS. I think that's one of the least important things when it comes to analyzing Arlecchino versus Mavuika. First of all, Mavuika does have some pros. One, of course, being the fact that she works as both a DPS and a sub DPS / support, whereas Arlecchino is basically only a DPS, and that's obviously a massive deal. That could mean for a lot of you Mavuika is more versatile on your account. But I do think, in terms of if you're just looking at who's better as an on-field DPS, I think there are just so many factors that we need to consider. If you guys remember my very first guide on her, the first strength I covered on her was her ability to swap out whenever you want. She will always keep her infusion since it's based on her bond of life, not field time. This also gives her a long field time flexibility, which is very useful because you can stay on field for as long as you want in order to secure a kill. And this makes her stand out from many of the other DPSs, because a lot of the other pyro characters can't do that. But not even just other pyro characters. You can switch her out in order to reactivate various support utilities like shields or grouping or batterying. And you can even swap her out if you need to tank a hit on another character. Yes, of course, Mavuika has very nice burst damage, but is she capable of swapping out? If you swap out to, let's say, group enemies or reactivate your buffs, do you get to keep her motorcycle fully buffed? And how long does the motorcycle last? Well, it kind of lasts 7 seconds, meaning she has her burst and then she has a 7-second infusion duration. Like I said, this is kind of almost like the Raiden Shogun. And as much as I like the Raiden Shogun, these days compared to a lot of other characters over time, we have heard a lot of complaints and complaining about how short her damage window is and how she is not very flexible, especially in longer fights. She can have huge downtime issues in longer fights. Whereas if you compare Raiden to a lot of the modern DPSs like Arlecchino and neuvillette, who basically don't have much downtime at all, it can feel pretty scuffed. So I'm going to be honest, if Mavuika is almost like the pyro version of Raiden, even if she's stronger than Raiden, I think those quality of life issues should still be a very relevant factor. Seriously, for the past year, everyone has been bat-chesting modern DPSs and supports with their long damage windows, long lasting buffs, very good at multi-wave. I need to see that same energy when the Pyro Archon comes out with her 7-second damage window. 9 or 10 if you want to count the burst. We need to see that same energy. I think if you had to take each different quality of life aspect, okay, like if you had to order it, yeah, if you had all of these 5, like how would you order it? If you had to design your perfect character, how would you order it? I feel like that would be number 1 just for general gameplay. This might be number 2 for general gameplay. Maybe this is how I would order it. Yeah, the last two you could debate. Look, Arlecchino is this one, this one, this one. Mavuika is this one. Not Circle Impact. Well, unfortunately, they are both Circle Impact. Like, if you want, you could do like not Circle Impact neither, and then none of them have it. So the thing is, Arlecchino C1 gives her this as well, whereas I don't think Mavuika's constellations help with any of these. Healing Arlecchino, yeah, Arlecchino can't be healed. But yeah, anyway, the point is, it's not to say one is better than the other, but the point is that I think all of these are more relevant than like whether one or the other does like 500 more DPS or like 1000 more DPS. I don't think that is the make or break. I think each of these things could be a bigger make or break than a little damage difference at peak potential. Yeah, I mean, Arlecchino can't be healed. Mavuika also is more teammate restricted. I mean, we can add more stuff. And again, I'm not even saying Arlecchino is that amazing. But I'm just saying, all of these things are more important than looking at sheets and seeing like which one does like 5% more damage. So yeah, the overall point is, if you've already got a built neuvillette team, a built Arlecchino team, a built team with whatever DPS you are very comfortable with, don't just go ahead and pull Mavuika if you don't exactly like her just because you might have heard she does more damage, because the current teams you have might be more stable, they might already be built. Not to mention, one of your DPSs, like for example neuvillette, might be using supports like Xilonen that your Mavuika might want to use. Same thing with if you have your Arlecchino, well Mavuika would be needing Bennett, and then you might have to mess around with different teammates, like you might have to start using ororon with your neuvillette instead. Maybe you find neuvillette with ororon fine, but maybe you don't. But on the other hand, if you invest in a Mavuika team, then you probably can stick with that team and it'll be a very strong team, it'll be a very strong system. As long as you invest into it and you build your characters, you build your Mavuika, and then you don't start getting the latest DPS whenever the latest DPS gets hyped up. Maybe there's a new DPS that gets announced to come in 2 or 3 patches from now. Don't jump on that hype train when you've just started investing in your Mavuika team. And you know, as we've been saying, that goes with Genshin and Star Rail. Don't start building the new follow-up DPS and the follow-up team if you're just gonna jump over to the break team when that gets hyped, or you're gonna jump to the DOT team when that gets hyped. I've already seen people get hyped about Skirk, who is obviously this character here. Maybe she's coming in a few patches, maybe she's a DPS, I don't know, maybe she's cryo or quantum or whatever, and there's a good chance a lot of people will be jumping from the Mavuika bandwagon to the Skirk bandwagon. And I just think, unless you guys are whales or high spenders, you guys should be very careful about potentially investing into all these different systems back to back. Let's talk about Mualani though, because I can see Mavuika being very popular with Mualani, but it might not necessarily be entirely due to strength. I could see maybe 50% of it to do with strength, 25% due to comfort, where you can use Mavuika's skill instead of using Xiangling's burst, which a lot of people don't like. But the truth is, I can see another 25% Mavuika being popular with Mualani and even just other characters in general because of the 5-star bias, especially the Archon bias. Because in reality, even if Mavuika isn't always an upgrade over Xiangling, I can see many players playing her instead. If they have the choice, they would rather play the newest 5-star character and the new Archon rather than a random old 4-star. That's just the truth. I think that sort of popularity buff can be a real thing, and I think it'd be a real thing so much to the point where I could actually see a lot of people playing raiden Mavuika. I could see, once we get the usage rates for the next Abyss, if you look at raiden teams, I would not be surprised if in the top 15, top 20, there are raiden Mavuika teams, even though Mavuika doesn't use her burst, so she has direct anti-synergy with raiden, because raiden kind of requires her teammates to use her burst in order to build resolve stacks. But I mean, a lot of people want to play the duo Archons. I could see that still being a thing. Speaking of that, I did try to see what happens if you have raiden C1, which lets her build resolve even faster. But even with that, a 3-man team with 1 character not even having a burst, you can't get carried by just Sara and Chevreus's burst. It doesn't build enough resolve. But like I said, even if that's the case, I can see people still playing Mavuika and raiden together. Not that I don't think she will be strong with Mualani, but the fact that Xiangling does still have a lot of flexibility that I don't think Mavuika will always bring. Current teams like this have super fast and super flexible setups. You don't always even need to cast Xiangling's Pyronado. Sometimes you can just set up with Guoba and you can vape enemies with just Guoba. Plus Xiangling's Pyronado lasts longer than Mavuika's skill unless you have Mavuika's constellations. And a lot of people are talking about Mavuika's value with Mualani being that Mavuika has a nuke as well. But to be honest, I don't know how relevant that is going to be. I think Mavuika's main strength in a Mualani team is the fact that she has pyro application on skill. I don't think her damage or her nuke is going to be that relevant in whether she's strong for Mualani or not. But yeah, even if Xiangling is more clunky for Mualani than Mavuika, Xiangling should still definitely have her pros. Like, one of the biggest strengths of Pyronado is that you can do drive-bys, which is when you're surfing around on your shark. With Mualani, you are applying pyro to enemies, like drive-bying them, And if you look at Mavuika with Mualani, she doesn't really have that drive-by potential that Pyronado has, meaning if you're not careful, you can run into scuff. And for like this, for example, if you're not careful, you might not even be applying pyro to enemies, and then you might even not even be vaping with Mualani, and it can just be scuffed overall. But yeah, for general play, it should be fine. And yeah, for most players, it should be more comfortable and it should be pretty good. Last thing on Mualani, I think, is like the value conversation. People always want to know, oh, how much pull value does the new support have? Should I get the new support for my DPS? And the thing with Mualani is, I think a lot of people don't like her current teams because they find Xiangling annoying to play. They find it quite scuffed. So I think a more comfortable skill-based version of Xiangling, which is what Mavuika kind of will be in these teams, I think that will be a definite practical improvement over these teams. But as for DPS, like if you want the most DPS, I think it does go back to what I've been saying for quite a while, which is, in reality, if you're talking about Mavuika in these off-field roles, a lot of the modern DPSs are just so strong that getting supports is almost never going to be as strong as vertically investing in these DPSs. Like, let's be completely honest, if that's what you're looking for, which is maximizing your Mualani, highly unlikely that any of these supports is going to be stronger than getting her C1. This is literally double damage on her first shark bite, let alone this C2, which lets you do her shark attack so much more faster. It's just not even, you can't even put into context how much of a DPS increase this is. And then you look at characters like Kini, like, this is a joke. 100% crit damage, Dendro res shred, 100% damage, increased AoE. All these modern DPSs are so overloaded that if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for the meta answer for how to increase your character's damage, it probably isn't going to be Mavuika. It probably is going to be getting constellations on them. But of course, a lot of people don't care about constellations. A lot of people care about how good Mavuika will be for their entire account, not just one character. So in that case, I mean, she will be very strong. You have to just base it around what you're looking for in a character. One last negative thing I probably do want to discuss is Xilonen. And the thing with Xilonen, I think Mavuika actually kind of makes Xilonen more clunky. And this is something that we've talked about leading up to Xilonen's release, which is that this scrolls buff, this artifact set here giving 40% damage in her teams, this is such a big part of Natlan supports kits that what happens when you have two Natlan supports, luckily I don't think it affects Mavuika's DPS role, because obviously if you're using Mavuika as a DPS, you're probably using her with Obsidian Codex or another DPS set instead, so you'll be able to keep Xilonen on scrolls. And if that's going to be Mavuika's most popular teams, then it won't affect her in those situations. But if you're playing them both off field, that means, I've already seen people bring this up, that maybe use Archaic, Petra or Instructor on Xilonen. But the issue with that is you're removing one of Xilonen's biggest strengths that everyone was hyping up, which is when people were arguing why Xilonen is so much quality of life these days. You're talking about Xilonen's long duration buffs and her artifact set being easier to use than Viridescent Venera on an Animo character. And now, are you expecting people to use short duration buffs like Archaic Petra or Instructor, plus Archaic Petra requiring you to pick up an Elemental Shard? I can see sweaty players like myself or other sweaty players doing this, but for the majority of you guys, I don't see you guys doing this. Even Instructor, I don't know how many people are actually going to be doing this. So I think overall, I mean, the numbers don't lie, the gameplay you've seen doesn't lie. Her as an on-field DPS should be very strong as long as you have the pieces of Exodia. I don't think there's too much to worry about there. There might be some practical issues like I'm getting into, talking about her uptime. Her uptime only being 7 seconds might be pretty scuffed. And yeah, the teammate restrictions, if you don't have those, she might have a decrease in performance. But I do think outside of that, there is a lot to talk about and there is a lot of potential positives, but also potential negatives with her that you do need to be having in consideration. So yeah, those are just some of my initial thoughts. I mean, there's so many different teams we could be trying her out in her off-field role. I could be trying her out with clorinde, neuvillette, be trying her out with Ganyu. There are so many things that I kind of just have to wait and see, do some extensive testing. So many different off-field roles. I'm not that worried about the on-field role, like I said, as long as you have a lot of the exodia pieces and you pay attention to her downsides and her upsides, as opposed to just focusing on the damage. But yeah, you guys can look forward to all the different testing I'm going to be doing. I hope you guys found this insight helpful. Hopefully you guys have saved a lot of primo gems for next patch. Unless you're one of the people who are skipping next patch entirely, if that's the case, then I salute you. And yeah, to be completely honest, I don't even want to get into her constellations above C1. I mean, they look very crazy. I'm sure you guys will see a lot of showcases in the future. Her C1 and C2 though, I could see being very popular, just like all Archons. I could see, especially in those usage rate stuff, you're going to see very high C1, very high C2 ownership rates.